Om Namah Sri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So today is the second talk in the series of talks, Monday talks, in which we will be discussing the life of Swami Vivekananda as Sister Nivedita saw him. So it has been aptly titled The Master as I Saw Him. So it's an account of her guru through a Western eye, we can say, because she was born in the West, educated in the Western way, but imbibed all the essential characteristics of an Eastern woman. So it's not only through the Western eye, through the Western woman's eye, that is more important. How did a Western woman of that era, and for the future women, Western women of India, Western women who visited India or who have some interest in India, how she looked upon her own master who inspired her one evening in London, and then she dedicated to she decided to dedicate her whole life to his cause. So naturally, we began this series of talks by discussing a beautiful foreword she wrote to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, the Master and his Message. Of course, as I told you, it has been published as a small booklet, the Master and his Message. It's an introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. We will not, though we had a special talk on that subject, the Master, Swami Vivekananda, as Sister Nivedita saw him. That was a special talk, and that dealt with that small introduction which she wrote introducing the complete works, the first volume, first edition of the complete works, which was published from Mayavati Advaita Ashrama. So now we come to the book which was written. We saw the historical, from a historical perspective, how she was approached after the Mahasamadhi of Swami Vivekananda, and we saw that it took so much. We saw the letter she wrote to Joe and others, saying from where we get a lot of information that she intended to write a life of Swami Vivekananda, and how she thought that she was not perhaps fit to the task. So instead of writing a biography, she decided to name it The Master as I Saw Him, which meant that it is her interpretation. Looking at it is just like looking at Swami Vivekananda, the wonderful perspective, the wonderful personality of her guru, through her eyes, and which she felt that she was not competent enough to give a complete picture. So then she says, maybe I shall paint him in a wrong way and not in a complete way, the way he was. So it's better I describe his life as I saw him, which may be a partial evaluation or a partial evaluation of his wonderful life, or a partial description of his wonderful life, his all encompassing personality, which she thought she had not understood fully. So anyway, Swami Sarvasthananda wrote a beautiful sent a small message of blessings when it was first published, which we saw last time in our previous class. And then she begins the book, the proper book, the proper biography of Swami Vivekananda, or her account of Swami Vivekananda's life as she saw him. So we'll get a very pretty good perspective or perspective view from a Western reader. That's why she begins the life with a small introduction or a small note, which she titles as A Word to the Western Readers. I mean, she specifically intended to write a few words for the Western readers so that they are able to appreciate or understand the context in which Swami Vivekananda's wonderful life and his message is being described in the following pages. So that's the idea, a word to the Western readers. Now she begins it in a very generalized way, in a dramatic way, generalized but a very dramatic way. Then she says, when she begins the biography by saying, from the close of the era of the Buddhist missions, Buddhism, as you all know, after Buddha, for several years, influenced a large number of Indians, the Indian subcontinent and beyond. The Far East also was where Buddhist missionaries were sent regularly. The Buddhist Sangha, which formally classified or compiled his teachings as Dhammapada more than 500 years after his passing away. We are very fortunate that after Sri Ramakrishna, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna was published very soon, or maybe after a few years after his death. The reminiscences and the biography, everything was being compiled. Whereas the same thing was not possible during Buddha's and the lives of the earlier prophets. 500 years after Buddha passed away, they compiled his teachings because they felt that there are many teachings which are being passed around in the name of Buddha. So they wanted to be sure that the authentic classification or compilation of Buddha's teachings are necessary. So the Buddhist missions, the missionaries who were preaching his message after his nirvana, he had sent missionaries even while he was alive. People who were his disciples, who were bhikkhus, known as bhikkhus, the wandering monks. The tradition of wandering monks, perhaps we can safely say, was popularized by Buddha. Not that wandering sannyasins were not there in the Vedic age, but as a missionary religion, as a religion in which the monks or the followers of that religion are sent out as missionaries, was practically unknown to India. Religion was an entirely private affair. We had a Guru Parampara, no doubt. Guru Parampara was existing even before Buddha came. Buddha had tried a few gurus himself till he got nirvana on his own. I mean, he decided to find out the truth himself because he was a prophet. He was a great world teacher. But before him, there was hardly any attempt at a sort of missionary activity or missionary preaching within the folds of Hinduism. Hindus were more or less, all the teachers were individualistic, though they held on to the tradition, their own tradition. That is why we have the concept of Gotra. The rishis of the Vedas, they classified themselves into particular lineages or Gotras. And there was this continuity of tradition, no doubt. But there was no organized religion as a Sangha. So for the first time, maybe even the other prophets who came after Buddha, they would have got this idea of missionary activity, or the Buddhist missions as they were called, Sangha as they were called. Three things are necessary. We had to surrender to Buddha. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami means I surrender to the Buddha. It is a state, as Buddha described it. He never meant that Buddha should be worshipped as a personal God. It is a state which he acquired, which he attained. And he said, all of you should become a lamp unto yourselves. You are the light of God is within you. He did not use the word God, the light of truth. That nirvana can be attained by anybody. That state of bodhi, as he said, which makes you a Buddha, is within, and it is within the. Everybody has his birthright, this access to this nirvana. So everybody can attain to Buddhahood. That is the idea. So Buddham Sharanam Gacchami doesn't mean I surrender to the personality or the person that is Buddha. This concept of avatara was perhaps not accepted by the Buddhists, and he himself did not like that. So Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, then we have Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. I surrender to the Dhamma, the teachings as compiled in the Dhammapada, that is the teachings of Buddha. And the third surrender or third vow they have to take, the Buddhist organization, is Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. Sangha means the community or the missionaries to whichever sect they belong. Of course, afterwards they were divided, as it happens in most of the missionary religions. There are breakaway factions, there are different traditions which separate. So we have Hinayana, Mahayana. As Buddhism spread, naturally it is to be expected that there will be categories or classifications within the main religion, just as we have many religious denominations under the church. So also Nivedita says the Buddhist missionaries who flourished in India. So that era, she's talking of the close of the era of Buddhist missions. Means the Buddhist missionaries, they flourished a lot, though they traveled all over the world, especially in the Far East to China, Japan, and all the Far East countries, and also to some other countries south of India like Sri Lanka and many other places. They had their prime. After they passed their prime, they were slowly declining, especially in India, because the Hindu revival, when the ancient Vedic religion, which always undergoes a revival, you may say, as Swami Vivekananda said, Buddhism was a reform movement within Hinduism. It's not that Buddha himself was born as a Hindu. So Vedic religion, it's not proper to use the word Hindu, because Hindu is a geographical concept which came into existence when people who lived on the other side, on the eastern side of the Sindhu river, because these Persian invaders or the people who came from the west, when they invaded India, they referred to all the people living on the other side of the Sindhu river, which they wanted to conquer, as Hindu. They could not pronounce Sa. The Persians, there's no Sa. They have to pronounce Sindhu as Hindu. So that is how the word Hindu, according to Swami Vivekananda, came into existence. So whatever be the religion they professed, whether they are Buddhists or Vedic followers of the Vedic religion, which was Vaidika Dharma or Sanatana Dharma as it was known. Hinduism was known by that name in the Indian subcontinent. So Shankaracharya and all the acharyas who came to revive, to rescue Hinduism, to rescue this Vedic religion, not Hinduism, rescue Sanatana Dharma or Vedic Dharma, that was the concept with all the acharyas. So they had to have they had a conflict, or you may say a verbal duel with all these Buddhist missionaries, and they had to prevail upon them. So gradually Vedic religion was successful without having that missionary zeal, which Shankaracharya started by starting the 4 different mutts in 4 corners of India for the revival of this Vedic Dharma or Sanatana Dharma, as they were known. So it was practically a reactionary movement to the influence of Buddhism, whose influence had by this time waned. It was it had a downward trend, at least within Hinduism, uh, because of various the mixing of various kinds of religious practices in the name of Buddhism. So a lot of degradation started, and that happens in history. So, and the close of the era of Buddhist missions, when Sister Nivedita refers to this, she was a great student of history. In fact, she encouraged Indians to write their own history. Said, don't depend on the history as written by the colonial scholars. Naturally, they will write a history which is biased towards themselves. If, for example, the big kings, the big emperors used to pay these historians, they used to give them salary. They were employed. They were employed by the court, by the king's court, and they were asked to write a biography glorifying their own rulers. So naturally, all the historical accounts were biased towards the rulers. So whoever came to India, especially those who conquered India, even much before the British came, it became a British colony, there were other attempts. So there were historians from different countries coming and giving their version of the history as they saw India. So naturally, history of India can be a if you want to really write a history of India, it has to be written by Indians. That is what Swami Vivekananda believed, and that is what Sister Nivedita also felt very strongly, that it is for Indian historians to write Indian history. So she inspired a lot of historians like Jadunath Sarkar, who was a famous historian, and she guided him because she was a student of history herself. She wrote the beautiful book Footfalls of Indian History. It's a beautiful book. I don't know whether so much of our young Indians, historians, would have got inspiration from that small book, Cradle Tales of Hinduism, Footfalls of Indian History, and Aggressive Hinduism. There are so many wonderful articles and books and booklets which form part of the complete works of Sister Nivedita, which you will find, in which you will find a wonderful study of Indian history. So she was not only a keen student of Indian history, and most of the knowledge she got was from her master during her various travels. First, her travels, which she has recorded, uh, where she recorded all the conversations, wonderful conversations, insights into history. When she traveled with Swami Vivekananda, they went up to Srinagar, Kashmir, and all those places. So when she went on a pilgrimage tour with her master in India, that was a great learning experience. And she heard from Swami Vivekananda, who himself was a wonderful student of history himself, and his wonderful historical insights into the importance of India in the conflict of, or you may say, a synthesis of the civilizations of the world which took place in India. Because our history, the Indian history, a history of the Indian subcontinent, is a mixture of all these wonderful events that took place. So right from Vedic age, a lot of historical insights, whatever happened after the Vedic age, then the Buddhism, the spread of Buddhism, the birth of Buddha, and after that, the Hindu revival during the Guptas, and there are so many phases of Indian history even before the Mughals came, and they ruled for about 700 years. Then we had about 250 years of British colonial rule. The colonial powers came, the Dutch came, the French came. Finally, it was the British who established a colony. So everybody who came and ruled over India wrote their version of Indian history. So it was very confusing. And the histories that were normally read in British India were those written by Western scholars. So it was trying to look at history from the Western eyes. So Sister Nivedita knew that, and she was asked by her master, Swami Vivekananda, when she decided to go to India to help his Indian work, especially the education of girls, women's education and women's empowerment. First, he said, don't come as with a patronizing attitude towards India. Just as most of the colonial people said, you need to be rescued from this terrible superstition which is Hinduism. That is what every modern educated Indian was told in those days, especially in Kolkata. It had become westernized because of uh, Macaulay, who decided to change the entire system of indigenous education and replace it with a type of education which was suitable for the West, for England, for the colonial powers. So naturally, the young Indians started doubting everything that was ancient, everything that was traditional. So Swamiji was very much keen that Indians should not fall into this trap of the histories that are written by a Western academic or a Western scholar, who obviously it is like looking at India through the Western eyes, which would not present a complete picture. It would definitely paint a partial picture if they are honest or if they're true historians, but a little bit of bias will still remain. Nobody wants to paint their own culture as inferior. So some attempt will be made, conscious or unconscious, by every historian to paint his culture as the best, as superior, and all the other cultures as inferior. So especially the colonial powers would definitely say that we have come to improve your conditions. You need reforms. So the educational reform which was brought about by Lord Macaulay, who believed that an English system of education should be imposed if we want to retain some kind of control over the people. So it's, instead of physical conquest, it is better to conquer the minds of the people so that they feel less enthusiastic about their own culture and adopt a foreign culture. So that is what every country aims to do. They want to impose their ideology on other countries. Very often there is resistance, as it happened in the case of India also. Every country wants to retain its national identity, its cultural identity. And if it is not allowed to be done, then there is reaction. No, you can't suppress the culture. Samuel Huntington wrote a beautiful book when he says clash of civilizations. Whenever civilizations are conquered physically, politically, by other civilizations, and they can succeed if they politically rule that country for a long time, but they can't impose their culture. They have to adapt to the local culture, to the local civilization. Otherwise, there will be a clash. So India, as long as its culture, its civilization, especially which was based on spirituality or religion, as long as that was not touched, it did not, the common mass, the common Indian or the common person who lived in the Indian subcontinent, he did not bother who was ruling them. Politically, there might have been the Mughals, there might have been the British colonies, and there might have been, in the intermediate period, the Buddhist rulers. As long as they did not force the citizens or the uh, people of India to follow their own ancient eternal beliefs or eternal values, the Sanatana or Vedic Dharma, as long as that was not done, they could easily rule the country. But the moment they touched Indian spirituality or Indian religion, there was a reaction. So also Buddhism had to face this reaction, and the Hindu revivalistic or the Vedic Dharma, which was being revived by all the acharyas, they found political patronage, and the kings, the different kings who succeeded the Buddhist kings, many of the kings got converted to Buddhism. They followed Buddha. Of course, they found something good in that religion, but then they encouraged the missionaries. So here Sister Nivedita is talking about the end of the era of the Buddhist missions. So Buddhism had already started waning in India. There was a Hindu revivalist movement, but because of the influence of the Western thoughts, there were several reform movements within Hinduism also, like Brahmo Samaj, and everybody thought that something is wrong, we need to change. Till Sri Ramakrishna came upon the scene, and he showed that we don't have to change. Everybody can hold on to its own civilization, its own culture, which cannot be transplanted. He said, let us live in a spirit of acceptance, and not just tolerance, but a spirit of acceptance. So that is why India accepted everybody who came here, provided they don't force change upon others. So the Mughals were welcome with their religion, the Jews were welcome, everybody, the Parsis, the great Zoroastrian religion, who was driven out from their homeland, the Persians, Persia, they came to the shores of India and they were welcome as long as you live in harmony with the local civilization, or the civilization of India. The Indian civilization was strong enough to accept, to absorb these wonderful ideas which came from outside of her geographical boundaries. So when these ideas came, along with their political conquerors who settled, they did not mind as long as they did not disturb the Vedic religion. Swamiji was a keen student of history, and so also Sister Nivedita echoes those ideas. And when she says that when the era of Buddhism came to a close, and until the day when, as a yellow-clad sannyasin, Swami Vivekananda stood on the platform of Parliament of Religions in Chicago exhibition of 1893, till that time, after the Buddhism, the missionary zeal of Buddhism, though it had conquered the whole of India, slowly started waning. The influence of the Buddhist missions became lesser and lesser, and the Vedic Dharma was revived by the great Acharya, Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, and then we had Madhvacharya, and so many reform movements within Hinduism sprang forth because the vitality of the Vedic and Sanatana Dharma could not be destroyed. So that led to a revival. But it was not until Swami Vivekananda burst upon the world stage. So she writes it very dramatically. After the, you may say, the close of the era of the Buddhist missions, when there was no powerful Hindu missionary or powerful representation of Vedic religion or Sanatana Dharma who could who would explode upon the world, and just as Buddha did. So that is why Swami Vivekananda once said, I have a message for the West as Buddha had a message for the East. I mean, he was speaking in a very prophetic way because he knew the impact that the revival which was caused by his participation in the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893 would change the currents of world civilization. It would bring a new harmony, a harmony between religions, a synthetic approach to different religions. That universalism would pave the way instead of having conflicts between civilizations. As Huntington said, the only way to prevent conflicts between two different civilizations, which are unique to their geographical location, no doubt, but they cannot be you cannot impose one civilization on the other, otherwise there will be clash. The only way is the Hindu way or the Vedic way, where you will be allowed to coexist. So coexistence was the only way, and so Sister Nivedita took forward this idea from her master Swami Vivekananda when she said that it was Swami Vivekananda who came to revive Hinduism. She says Hinduism had not thought of herself as a missionary faith, which she never did. Hinduism was always a individual pursuit of a jiva towards the ultimate self, the lower self, jivatman towards the Paramatma. That was the individual journey. There was nothing missionary about Hinduism, though there were traditions where the Guru Parampara would take that knowledge forward, but it was confined to a particular sect or a particular Gotra, as the Vedic Rishi said. Everything was confined within a tradition which was allowed to coexist with other traditions. Belonging to one Gotra did not prevent me from mixing with other Gotras. So also the peaceful coexistence of all the Vedic rishis, the Vedic traditions, and the later Pauranic movements, Ramanuja's followers coexisted there, though there were occasional clashes. But within the fold of Hinduism, there was a lot of harmony between the different sects of Hinduism. That was the unique feature of Hinduism, or the Sanatana Dharma, because it is based on eternal values, that I accept you, I not only tolerate you, but I accept you. So with that spirit, they accepted everybody. But to do this, as Swami Vivekananda said, that was the greatest temptation he had in the West. When he saw the Buddhist missions, when Holy Mother saw how Buddhist missionaries had built huge mathas near Banaras when she had been there, the big monasteries which she saw, the Buddhist monasteries where monks were living in under with so much of facilities for their spiritual development, and so much of peacefully they were carrying out their missionary propaganda. Seeing that, Holy Mother prayed to Thakur, said, all your disciples are wandering here and there. They have no place to stay. So she prayed, and then finally Swami Vivekananda very hesitatingly started the Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission. So that was the idea behind that was, according to Nivedita, Hinduism had never thought of herself, the Vedic religion, as a missionary faith. It was too flexible, and Swami Vivekananda doubted whether this approach would succeed. He himself said, it was a great temptation I got from the Christian missionaries and the way different missions of different Semitic religions and also Buddhism managed to take the message of the master, their masters, their founders, to different corners of India, corners of the world. So that is how Christianity spread, that is how Buddhism spread, that is how other religions spread. But according to Nivedita, it was only after Swami Vivekananda championed the cause of Vedic Sanatana Dharma in the Parliament of Religions as a religion, as a faith, or as a spiritual movement which could bring about harmony, as opposed to other Semitic religions. If because of their historical, if we see the history of those different religions, you will find that it often ended in clashes, though their founders perhaps never wanted any kind of conflict. But when the Swami Vivekananda believed that the moment it takes the form of a missionary religion, then there is a tendency to become fanatical. That's why he was afraid. If I create a sect in the name of Sri Ramakrishna, then it would be conflicting with other sects. How can I preserve the identity of a universal religion based on Sanatana Dharma, at the same time we live in harmony with others without trying to convert them to our way of faith, or maybe way of spirituality, because that is the essence which has made the eternal religion of Hinduism or Vedic religion to survive. So Hinduism, till Swami Vivekananda came on the scene, Hinduism never bothered about following or gathering a following with a missionary approach. No doubt there were sectarian movements within Hinduism who had their own followers. They had their own missionaries, but it was disorganized. It was not as organized as the Buddhist missions or the Christian missionaries, who were systematically trying to convert people to their faith. But forcible conversion was not what Hinduism ever attempted in her entire history. If you see, as Sister Nivedita will note here, she says the professional teachers were Brahmins, being citizens of and householders. They were part of a Hindu society itself, and as such, they had imposed restrictions, and they were held to be debarred from crossing the seas. So that is known as Kala Pani. You should not cross. Even today, the Jains and the Jainish religion, they don't believe that one should transcend the boundaries of India. And during Swami Vivekananda, he was called a Mlecha because he broke the rules. And our wandering sadhus, who are in the highest cases, the Brahmin caste had some monopoly. There were some defects within the eternal religion of the Hindus because they tried to be exclusive, and that was the cause of downfall of India. So they had authority, but within India, and they said that we have to restrict. They were afraid that if they went abroad, that missionary zeal was not encouraged, and they in fact debarred these great saints from crossing. Unlike Buddhism, Buddha himself sent missionaries to all parts of the world to convert people with a positive intent, of course, to what he believed to be the right path. So that attempt has been made by every religion except Hinduism. So Sister Nivedita says, as a background to the Western readers, she says Swami Vivekananda, when he went and spoke at the Parliament of Religion, he created a beginning of a missionary movement which would be totally different from the other missionary movements. It would be a mission of peace, a mission of acceptance rather than a mission of tolerating other people. You see, most of the missionaries, after so many clashes of different religions, they found that the only way to peacefully coexist is to accept others. Whereas trying to increase the numbers in their own fold through different methods, either by force or by other means, they still believed that we cannot clash with everybody, because if we are in a minority, in fact, there are instructions given to the different religious missions that in a place where you are in minority, you have to behave in such a way. The place where you are in a majority, you have more freedom, because survival is the main instinct. And all these missions, they are careful that they do it in a very clever way, so that they don't don't impose their religion, or at least they are not seen as imposing their religion. It has to be done with, but there the question of acceptance does not come. So when a particular religion comes to another geographical area where it is in a minority, it does not believe. It said, I accept you as true because you are powerful, but I tolerate you because you are powerful, so I just tolerate you. Or even if I am powerful, I tolerate you even if you are in minority, but I don't accept what you say. So that idea of accepting others and allowing them the freedom to follow their own religion was unique to the Hindu missionary or the missionary religion founded by Swami Vivekananda. Of course, here Sister Nivedita uses Hinduism in that broad sense. So she says Hinduism had not thought of herself as a missionary religion. That is what she's saying. Though after Buddhism, perhaps Swami Vivekananda was the greatest, you may say, religious leader who thought of having a missionary approach, not in the negative way of converting, but preaching the universal ideas, so that you preach the ideas of toleration, not a toleration, acceptance, as opposed to toleration, which does not solve the problem. Of course, clash does not solve the problem. If you clash with, then it is harmful for both sides. You have to learn peaceful coexistence, not with the spirit of toleration, but with a spirit of acceptance. So Sister Nivedita is trying to explain to the Western readers that Swami Vivekananda came to the West not with a missionary zeal like the other religions did to convert them to their faith, but he came with a peaceful message, a universal message which would enable every religion, every spiritual movement to coexist and accept each other. So they never thought, all these great scholars, these preachers, he says, the highest wandering sadhus, though they were very powerful spiritual giants but they were not bothered to preach these universal ideas in an organized or in a missionary way. But she says it is not only them, not only the preachers of Hindu Sanatana Dharma who were exclusive, who did not even allow their great saints to cross the seas. They somehow became exclusive. For some strange reason, they believed that one should not cross the boundaries of India. So that's why she says that Swami Vivekananda also believed the greatest mistake that Indian people committed, other than Buddha did not believe in that. So though he was a Hindu, he was a follower of Vedic religion, but once he knew truth, he said it should be universal. It should go out and preach these universal teachings to everybody. But naturally, as days pass, these universal values are sacrificed and they become exclusive. So that all inclusiveness has to be preserved. So Swami Vivekananda was in a dilemma. That's why Sister Nivedita says, nor did Swami Vivekananda appear at the doors of Chicago with any credentials that he is a representative of the Hindu missionary religion. No, he just went as an individual, a representative of Sri Ramakrishna, a universal person who would usher in a new universal movement in the world. So he would have been, he says, he had been sent across the Pacific Ocean. See the wonderful words she used. He had been sent across the Pacific Ocean, just as he might have wandered from one Indian village to another, by the eagerness and faith of a few disciples in Madras. So he says, just as for him it was just an extension of his Indian wandering. And that is how the Vedic religion was preached since the ancient, from time immemorial. It is these wandering monks. Religion, you should remember, was never preached by the householders. Hinduism or Vedic religion never made that mistake. There were householders who wrote wonderful books. There were academicians. But it was the wandering monk who took religion from the door. That is why they sacrificed their lives. They used to go from place to place without being attached to anybody or any geographical boundary. Nobody had a guts to ask the wandering monk. That was the tradition, that you could not ask him about his past, whether he belonged to Bengal or whether he belonged to South India. All monks were considered to be universal people. That was the wonderful value of this wandering life. Nobody could question him from which part of India. That exclusiveness, the moment he took sannyas, the moment he took the Gerua robes, he was supposed to become universal. That idea was deeply there, but it was not done in a missionary way. It was not done in an organized way. So Nivedita says he had just crossed the Pacific Ocean as he would go from Banaras to Dwaraka, to some other part of India. This was just an extension. Sri Ramakrishna came and told him, you just crossed the seas. And he went. He knew most of the Orthodox Brahmins of his own state, the birthplace, they vehemently criticized him. Oh, he has first of all no right to go cross the sea. So when he came back, he was not allowed to visit Dakshineshwar. So much of orthodoxy was there by the priest class, the Brahmin class. They said, you can't come back, you have crossed the oceans. That is not permitted according to our Shastra. That is what they said. And the very place where he got his inspiration, the Dakshineshwar Kali temple, he was denied entry there. He said, you can't come. It's only Kali Ghat arranged. They did not mind him coming there. So recently, the Dakshineshwar temple authorities held a big function in which they said we have to publicly ask for pardon for what our uh, the management did 100 years ago, some kind of prayaschitta, some kind of repentance for denying Swami Vivekananda entry to the very Kali temple where he got inspiration from Sri Ramakrishna. That is because of the orthodoxy. So these monks, Indian monks, they carried religion from the door step from one village to another village. And Swami Vivekananda did not go because nobody sent him, gave him credentials that you belong to the Hindu mission or some kind of. He did not go as other missionaries went. Dharmapala went as a representative of the Buddhist. From India, many people had gone. Even Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, his classmate, who was so jealous of his success in the Parliament of Religion, even he went with a proper letter of introduction from the Brahmo Samaj. So there were missionary movements here and there scattered, but they were not so powerful enough. And they were allowed to participate because the main idea of starting this World Parliament of Religions was to not only attempt to give a platform to different religions and avoid clashes. That was not the main intention, but one of the main intention is to show that how the Christian missionary or the Christian religious movement was far superior than all the other movements. They had an intention of showing that we are far more organized than all other, to show Christianity in better light. That was perhaps the motive, as many of the scholars say now. That was the main intention. Revered Barrows, who was one of the members of the organizing committee, they were fully confident that ours is a religion which has maximum number of followers. So with a spirit of toleration, they invited all these speakers. Some were invited, some were not invited, like Swami Vivekananda. So Nivedita very clearly says he didn't go there upon any invitation, neither was he invited, nor did he represent any formal missionary group or sect within Hinduism. Nobody sponsored him, some friends said, you just go. And just as he would go from one village to another, by the eagerness and faith of a few disciples in Madras, one of them was Alasinga, he just went. And then he says, to the credit of the American people, the wonderful liberal attitude, and with American hospitality and frankness, he was welcomed and given an opportunity of speaking, because they were very wonderful people, most of them wonderful Christians. It's not that everybody became an impediment for his journey to the West. They were great friends belonging to all different religions, including Buddhism, including the Christians, like Professor John Henry Wright, who gave him a letter of introduction. It was all his English and it is all his American disciples who paved the way for his success. Though some of the theosophists who were trying to preach their own philosophy as a kind of reform movement within Hinduism, they tried to claim that we had in fact inspired Swami Vivekananda, because some friends of Alasinga or in Madras, they were associated with the theosophical movement in Madras. But Swami Vivekananda knew that in fact they had shut doors when he wanted some kind of accommodation, when he was starving, when he was not able to get any help in America in the initial days. He went to some of these theosophical societies and they said, they wrote a letter, in fact, which Swami Vivekananda somehow managed to get. They wrote a letter saying that let the devil die of cold. That was the treatment he was given in the beginning. It was a very difficult journey till he was accepted, till Professor John Henry Wright. He wrote a letter saying that he is more learned than all the people in all the professors of all the universities put together. When he wrote a letter, because he admired the wonderful universal spirit, and as a good Christian, he wanted to support many of his American disciples. None of them were Indians or had anything to do. They were not even trained, they were not even lovers of Buddhism or any other sect of Hinduism. They were very good Christians in their own right, very liberal people, very rational people, and who had perhaps lived and practiced the principles of Christ as true followers of Christ. So they did not oppose, nor in fact some of the Unitarian churches, including the Berkeley Unitarian, the church in Berkeley, near Berkeley, where Swami Vivekananda spoke to nearly 1500 people. In fact, that church, Unitarian church near Berkeley, which facilitated his 7 days, Swami Vivekananda seems to have spoken that the church is still there, the Unitarian church. So that wonderful gathering, that inspired a lot of universal ideas, and the first meeting of the UNESCO in fact was held in this famous building near Berkeley. That is known as Oakland, or I think it is Oakland. I forget the name of the place, but that is very near Berkeley, and that's the Unitarian Church, where they said where the universal, the attempts to form a universal organizations like United Nations, UNESCO, much later after the Second World War, perhaps the seed that he sowed there, the 7 days of wonderful talks he gave, thanks to the liberal attitude of the Unitarian Church there. So that was the church in Oakland where he gave this universal message. So it was American hospitality and frankness and the liberal attitude of some really good people in America, like the Hale family, and there's so many wonderful friends he made in America. He somehow got an opportunity to speak at the Parliament of Religions. So she is trying to prepare a background, give us a background of how Swami Vivekananda, against all odds, went to spoke at the Parliament of Religion and not only created history as a spokesman of Hinduism, but also brought fresh, a universal spirit to all the other religions. In his case, as in the case of the Buddhist missionaries, the impelling force that drove him to foreign lands was the great personality of one at whose feet he sat. So, just as the Buddhist missionaries were all inspired by Buddha, the great life of Buddha, though the message got diluted after so many years, naturally the original message that Swami Vivekananda said, every 500 years a new force, a new spiritual force has to come, because the old force will have spent itself because of the wrong interpretation of the followers. As time passes, they forget the original message of their master. So she says, it just as Buddha inspired the Buddhist missionaries, so what forced him to go to the American lands? Just as he would visit one village, he would visit different parts of India. In fact, his wandering life of 3 years taught him many things. In fact, some of the visits like Porbandar, Shankar Pandurang Pandit, and then finally his Madras disciples, they were the ones who said you have to go to this Parliament of Religions. They knew about it, and Swami Vivekananda, just as he would go from Madras to Calcutta or Calcutta to some other part, Delhi, he just his disciples arranged for his sea journey, and he just went there without knowing what to do. Just as a wandering monk, he doesn't plan anything. In fact, he retained that attitude of a wandering monk even in America. He thought he will follow the same lifestyle there. Just go and beg for food wherever people allow him, good or bad, he will just stay there. But that was not there. That was not in the American culture, thanks to some of his good friends. Like otherwise, he would have starved on the streets of Chicago. As he himself said, he was hungry and just sitting, and suddenly Miss Hale just recognized him, Mrs. Hale. The Hale family became his first hosts. They saw a famished person without because every time he knocked at somebody's door, they just closed the door, seeing his color, thinking that he was a beggar. He didn't realize, he was so innocent that he thought he will get the same kind of treatment which Indian monks get when they wander. But that did not happen. When he went to Chicago, it was just by the grace of his master that the kindly Hale family saw him sitting hungry, not eaten for many days, and looking very dirty because of his clothes were all, he did not have any shelter. He didn't have enough money to stay. But because of the kind efforts and the wonderful grace of Sri Ramakrishna, so that helped him. That was the force that drives the wandering monks in India, and that took him to the West. And he says the impelling force that drove him to a foreign lands, not only America, but Europe and England and all the other places which he visited, was the personality of the Great One. The Great One means his great master. So just as she is saying, describing her own master, her master was inspired by the great master who was Sri Ramakrishna, and whose feet he had sat at Dakshineshwar and whose life he had shared for many years. He lived with him for whatever period he managed to spend with his guru, but that was enough. That was the force, that was the indication that Sri Ramakrishna that you go to the West. He just followed his master without knowing, without planning. In India, in the Parivirajakas, the wandering monks are never supposed to plan. They just go knock at different houses. If they get food and shelter, it's fine. Otherwise, they sleep under the tree. It is a very tough life. But he thought the same would apply in America. But he didn't realize that this was a different culture. If you knock, a stranger knocks on some door, they will simply shut the door. Because people do not know that this is a way of life. They think it's some vagabond or some thief. So that is how Sister Nivedita is explaining to the Western reader here before she starts the main life. It begins from London because she saw Swami Vivekananda for the first time in London. So it's not a biography where she will describe all the childhood and all. But occasionally Swami Vivekananda used to tell about his childhood days, his college days. So that is mentioned here. So other than that, the life of this master, as I saw him, life of Vivekananda begins from London. That is the time when she first met. But before that, she is writing the short note, trying to explain to the Western readers the background, why he came to this country, how he found himself in a strange land without help. Of course, helped by Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna was always there with him. And this he realized when he was frantic in the beginning. He wrote a letter to his Madras disciples, saying, I am just about to starve and die here. And he asked Alasinga to send some money, wired from one of, because he ran out of money. The Khetri Maharaja had given some funds, and the Parliament of Religions was not to be held till September, and he reached there in July. So he had exhausted all the money in Boston, though some kind devotees like Kate Sanborn, some nice admirers whom he happened to meet in a train, took him to Boston. He spent some time with them, but somehow he exhausted his money and he was practically would have died on the streets there. But and that's why he frantically wrote that I'm running out of money. You people sent me here, but I don't know where to go. Nobody is helping me. So he asked for some funds. But before the funds could arrive, somehow some arrangement was made. The Hale family welcomed him. Then he was welcomed to every house in America, because after his success when people realized who he was, then all the doors were open to him. At that time, he cried. He said, my master has saved me. For 3 years, I wandered in the deserts of India, went into the forest, tigers came. Sometimes I would have died. I had so much faith in my master that he saved me every time there was some danger. And I survived. And he pointed out to me to come to this country and see how unfaithful a disciple I am. He mentioned this. If you read some of his letters and if some of his utterances, conversations, he says how unfaithful I had become to my master. The one who saved me in the hot deserts of Rajasthan, of India, and the deep forests. Many times there was danger, and miraculously I was without food, without anything. Still, I survived by the grace of, by his grace, by my master's grace. And now coming to this land, I become panicky and ask for money. He felt very remorseful. He said, what have I done? Have I lost faith in my Guru? Will he not help me? One who helps me in the deserts of India, in the dangerous forests of India, will he not help me in a foreign land? Is my master so powerless? So that was the feeling he shared. He told Alasinga, don't send any money. He has already, through his grace, many people now, my doors are open in many houses. I don't have any problem. Just as in India, many of his wonderful hosts, some kings, some great householders, they just supported me. The same way, by his grace, I am getting all the support. So in a moment of panic, in a moment of weakness, when I lost faith in the master, I wrote to you for money, so don't send the money. It's a very beautiful letter, emotional letter he writes to his Madras disciples, who were of course about to send him money. But he said, don't send. I unnecessarily panicked. And the reason is that I was not having enough faith that my master would somehow save me. If I have depended totally on him in India, then why not in the West? So at every step, he says, he actually saw the signs, how at every step Sri Ramakrishna was supporting him. When the missionaries, some of them tried to poison him, the master appeared in a vision. He said, don't drink that coffee. A coffee was offered to him. So he quietly threw it. So in various ways, the master guided him, supported him. So we will conclude today. This is how Sister Nivedita introduces Swami Vivekananda. He said he just was inspired by the wonderful universal life of his master, and he at whose feet he sat with that same motive, just as the Buddhist missionaries, inspired by their master Buddha, Ananda and others, disciples, through its successive chain of disciples, spread the message. So to the Western reader, she is, before introducing Swamiji's life, as she saw him from London later on, she says this is the background with which he went to the West. So to give a Western reader a clear idea of who this person was, how he came, and what is the motive force that sent him to the West, we will conclude this class, and if there are some questions, we can just take them and we'll continue in the next. Yeah. So the first, it's not a question, but he says, I think Swamiji's message to us by appropriate explanation. Usually Swamiji is perceived in a different way, like preaching a particular religion. He was in form of some kind of universal religion. Yes, exactly. There are various attempts made by even by Indians to limit him to a particular, preaching a particular religion or a particular sect, as if he came to create another sect of Ramakrishna. He said, I never came to make another sect. Just as every religion makes their own founder the main person of that sect, and then they say anybody who is outside of the sect, they can be tolerated, but they cannot be accepted. No, Sri Ramakrishna's and Swami Vivekananda's approach was you can accept everybody as they are, without even changing their religion or their faith in which they are born. They can be true Christians, they can be true Muslims, they can be true Buddhists, and yet at the same time, they can appreciate the universal ideas of Sri Ramakrishna. This is the message of Swami Vivekananda's. This is Swami Vivekananda's universal message, which appealed to Sister Nivedita. She was a Christian at heart. She loved Christ as any Christian would do. And that doesn't prevent her from dedicating her whole life to the masters, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda. That's why she said she always used to sign her letter Nivedita of Ramakrishna Vivekananda, because she found herself, she found a liberating message which was not fanatical, which allowed her to remain a Christian in the highest sense, to be a true follower of Christ, at the same time try to live in harmony with others, whatever be their religious faith. You be sincere to your master, to your Ishta. That is the spirit of Hinduism. You be sincere to your Ishta, that is Krishna, but that doesn't mean you hate somebody whose Ishta is the Divine Mother. For centuries, thousands of years, people have lived in harmony, coexisted with each other within the family, though each one has a different Ishta. Very often it happens that in the same house, same family, there are different Ishtas. But for that reason, we don't quarrel with each other. That's the idea. So, Vasudev Pandya says it was Pasadena, California, but the I forgot the name of the church which is near Berkeley. If Vasudev Pandya was messaging, Pasadena, of course, he spoke of universal religion. That is there. That is one lecture. But there is a Oakland church which I visited, where they even preserved the chair on which Swami Vivekananda sat, and the pulpit from where he delivered his talk. It's a Oakland Unitarian Church, which is, I think it is near Berkeley. I'm not very sure. I'm not very familiar with the geography of California, but though he spoke in Oakland, in Pasadena, one of the churches, but it was the Oakland Unitarian Church where there were huge crowds. They had to combine two halls. In fact, I have visited that Unitarian Church, where they say the house was so full that they had to open the doors and allow people to attend the talk from outside. So there's another question by Harry. How do you know who is your Ishta? I have an idea, but I'm not sure 100%, just in case I'm wrong. Now, Ishta means a personality whom you like. See, that is the greatness of Hinduism, that it offers you a wide choice. Some people would like to look upon God as their mother, because somehow they are attached to the figure of the mother. They want to see God as a mother. Some want to see it as God as a father. Some just don't want any form. So Ishta means you follow that concept of reality which appeals to you, appeals to your temperament. So that is how some people said we don't like forms. So they go to Advaita Vedanta. For them, their Ishta is the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, which focuses on Satchidananda in its purest aspect. But that doesn't mean the other aspects are lesser. So that is how you can choose your Ishta. But in the Indian tradition, it is the Guru who is supposed, if you accept a Guru, if you are on an individual pursuit of spirituality, then it is okay. Then you can choose your own Ishta. But normally, if you choose it to follow somebody, follow a particular tradition, then the Guru finds out the Ishta for you. Ishta means one whom you accept a form of the reality, who may be an incarnation or who may just be a deity. It may not be a historical person. In Hinduism, there are so many deities, aspects of reality, different aspects. We have Ganesha, we have Shiva. Each one has a particular characteristic which appeals to some people. So if somebody in the family worships Shiva because somehow they like the characteristics, the Puranic characteristics of the concept of Shiva, so some people may like Krishna for historical reasons, for some kind of attachment they have to the life of Sri Krishna and his message. So though the message is same, the core of every message is same, the Ishta can be different. So that's the idea. So There's a question from Sharon which says, man always depended on food, isn't it? Yes, that is true. Because our body, our personality begins with Annamaya Kosha. To some extent or the other, whether even in the Vedic age, though Sri Ramakrishna says, Annagata Prana. Now, in this age, Kali Yuga, man is mainly depending on the food he takes. So here you have to be careful. Anna doesn't just mean what kind of physical food he takes. There is a mental food also. Whatever you take in through the senses, in a broad way, you can also say. But here in particular, Sri Ramakrishna says, man's life depends on food. So it is important. Swami Vivekananda said, 1/3 of your problems are based on what you eat and how you treat your body. If you torture it, if you don't look after it properly, then you can't meditate, you can't develop a higher spiritual life. So that is why it is based on food. Okay. Was Nivedita not initiated in Hinduism? She did not practice Christianity as far as I know. No, not at all. Though she was given the vows of Brahmacharya. See, that is the problem. What do you mean by initiated into Hinduism? Hinduism does not believe in conversion of any form. You can have Christ as an Ishta. So practicing Christianity does not mean following the church. That is the greatest mistake. Just as practicing Hinduism doesn't mean following a particular sect or a particular temple or a particular organization. No, absolutely no. That freedom is there in Sanatana Dharma, where you can accept anybody as your Ishta. So if you accept Christ as your Ishta or Buddha as your Ishta, she was free to choose the Ishta she wanted. So you are a Christian if you appreciate Christ. You are a Buddhist if you accept the interpretation that Buddhists, these are all terms. You love Buddha, you appreciate his life, you take inspiration from his teachings. That doesn't mean that you have to classify yourself as a Buddhist. That is a very narrow approach. So nobody initiates anybody into a religion. We point out, the function of the guru is to point out your Ishta. In fact, they say, Sister Nivedita was told by Swami Vivekananda, who was her guru, that Buddha is your Ishta. That doesn't mean Christ is become secondary or Krishna becomes secondary. She had equal love for everybody because she was broad enough to understand that they are all different aspects of the same reality. But because there was something in Buddha which she liked more, so perhaps Swami Vivekananda said, Buddha is your Ishta. That doesn't mean Christ is not your Ishta. You can still appreciate and be a Christian in that sense, in the widest sense of the term. I am a Christian if I love. I do not become Christian by birth. I do not become a Hindu by birth. I am a Hindu by spirit. I am a Hindu by a Christian by spirit. I am a Muslim by spirit. So what is that spirit? The prophet's universal teachings, if you follow. Any prophet, any saint, any Ishta we can take. Hinduism offers the widest choice. That is why it is so universal. You can accept anybody. There are millions of deities. And you can at the same time appreciate the other people who have different Ishtas. Maybe they are staying in your own family. Doesn't matter. One can have Buddha as an Ishta, another can have Christ as an Ishta, another maybe an atheist or maybe an Advaitin. He says, I don't want any Ishta, I just want pure truth, as Vedanta teaches me. So with Vedic Vedanta accepts every sect, every Ishta, and does not classify people as such. You are basically a human being first, and that is the core of your personality, the divine within. Which Ishta you follow to reach the goal is your choice. So that is how universalism is being preached. We'll come to that aspect. Now, there's one more question. The God I am thinking of appeared a lot in my dreams and I'm looking for a guru. Thank you for telling me that. Okay, that is fine. That is a good sign that you get the vision of your Ishta in your dream. So if you are convinced of the truth of the dream, or if you are inspired by that, then uh, it is a good sign, and perhaps at an appropriate time you might even get a guru. So one has to keep a just dreams are not sufficient. You need to consciously think and decide whether accepting this particular dream or the person or the figure that you saw in the dream is your real guru or is your real Ishta. Of course, a guru will tell you that, but it is not just enough to go by dreams, because sometimes dreams are a result of what you think when you are in the waking state. So that influences a person's choice of Ishta. So that should not, it should be a conscious decision. By that is why we insist on everybody to read the life and message in the original as far as possible of anybody whom you like to take as Ishta. Without knowing him, I can just see a form and say that he is my Ishta or she is my Ishta. Just seeing a form. You need to know something about it. You should have an in-depth knowledge of the Ishta whom you wish to follow. If I want to have Buddha as my Ishta, for example, I should know about his core teachings. I should know about his core personality so that I can appreciate or love him. That is the idea. Yeah. So the answer here, another question is that I understand the dreams alone are not true. Some of the stuff from the dreams become true, and I saw physical things in real life. Wonderful. However, I want to ask a guru or a qualified person, as I'm not sure enough of myself on this. This is the right approach. Very often we do not know how to interpret these dreams or even know who is or what is our Ishta. So one has to be a bit patient and not just jump into conclusion. Otherwise, there is a tendency to change the Ishta. You take up some religion or some faith, you have great, because you have not studied it in depth. Then after some time you feel you need to go to some other Ishta. That is not a good thing. It is, one has to be very prudent and try to find out what is it that attracts me to this person. Maybe I've had dreams about that person or dreams about that deity or that Ishta. Whatever it may be, you have to analyze it in the conscious state. And then, of course, take the help of a guru to decide. Okay. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.